and I will not stop trying to work with both parties to get things moving. Faster for middle-class families and those trying to get into the middle class. When Congress returns next month, my hope is that instead of simply trying to pass partisan message bills on party lines that don't actually solve problems. They're going to be willing to come together to at least focus on some key areas where there's broad agreement. After all that we've had to overcome, our Congress should stop standing in the way of our country's success. So with that, let me take a couple of questions. And I will start with Roberta Rampton of Reuters. Question, thanks. I want to ask about the situation in the Middle East. And why do you think Israel should embrace a ceasefire in Gaza when one of its soldiers appears to have been abducted, and when Hamas continues to use its network of tunnels to launch attacks? And also, have you seen Israel act at all on your call to do more to protect civilians? President Obama, well, first of all, I think it's important to note that we have, and I have, unequivocally condemned Hamas and the Palestinian factions that were responsible for killing two Israeli soldiers and abducting a third almost minutes after a ceasefire had been announced. And the UN has condemned them as well. And I want to make sure that they are listening, if they are serious about trying to resolve this situation. That soldier needs to be unconditionally released as soon as possible. I have been very clear throughout this crisis that Israel has a right to defend itself. No country can tolerate missiles raining down on its cities and people having to rush to bomb shelters every 20 minutes or half hour. No country can or would tolerate tunnels being dug under their land that can be used to launch terrorist attacks. And so, not only have we been supportive of Israel in its right to defend itself, but in very concrete terms, for example, in support for the Iron Dome program that has intercepted rockets that are firing down on Israeli cities. We've been trying to cooperate as much as we can to make sure that Israel is able to protect its citizens. Now, at the same time, we've also been clear that innocent civilians in Gaza caught in the crossfire have to weigh on our conscience, and we have to do more to protect them. A ceasefire was one way in which we could stop the killing. To step back and to try to resolve some of the underlying issues that have been building up over quite some time. Israel committed to that 72-hour ceasefire, and it was violated. And trying to put that back together is going to be challenging, but we will continue to make those efforts. And let me take this opportunity, by the way, to give Secretary John Kerry credit. He has been persistent. He has worked very hard. He has endured on many occasions, really. Unfair criticism simply to try to get to the point where the killing stops and the underlying issues about Israel's security, but also the concerns of Palestinians in Gaza, can be addressed. We're going to keep working towards that. It's going to take some time. I think it's going to be very hard to put a ceasefire back together again if Israelis and the international community can't feel confident that Hamas can follow through on a ceasefire commitment. And it's not particularly relevant whether a particular leader in Hamas ordered this abduction. The point is that when they sign onto a ceasefire, they're claiming to speak for all the Palestinian factions. And if they don't have control of them, and just moments after a ceasefire, is signed, you have Israeli soldiers being killed and captured. Then it's hard for the Israelis to feel confident that a ceasefire can actually be honored. I'm in constant consultation with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Our national security team is in constant communication with the Israel military. I want to see everything possible done to make sure that Palestinian civilians are not being killed. And it is heartbreaking to see what's happening there. And I think many of us recognize the dilemma we have. On the one hand, Israel has a right to defend itself, and it's got to be able to get at those rockets and those tunnel networks. On the other hand, because of the incredibly irresponsible actions on the part of Hamas, to oftentimes house these rocket launchers right in the middle of civilian neighborhoods. We end up seeing people who had nothing to do with these rockets ending up being hurt. Part of the reason why we've been pushing so hard for a ceasefire is precisely because it's hard. To reconcile Israel's legitimate need to defend itself with our concern with those civilians. And if we can pause the fighting, then it's possible that we may be able to arrive at a formula that spares lives and also ensures Israel's security. But it's difficult. And I don't think we should pretend otherwise. Bill Plant. Question, Mr. President, like that ceasefire, you've called for diplomatic solutions not only. In Israel and Gaza but also in Ukraine, in Iraq, to very little effect so far. Has the United States of America lost its influence in the world? Have you lost yours? President Obama, look, this is a common theme that folks bring up. Apparently people have forgotten that America, as the most powerful country on earth, still does not control everything around the world. And so our diplomatic efforts often take time. They often will see progress and then a step backwards. That's been true in the Middle East. That's been true in Europe. That's been true. In Asia. That's the nature of world affairs. It's not neat, and it's not smooth. But if you look at, for example, Ukraine, we have made progress in delivering on what we said we would do. We can't control how Mr. Putin thinks. But what we can do is say to Mr. Putin, if you continue on the path of arming separatists with heavy armaments that the evidence suggests may have resulted in 300 innocent people on a jet dying, and that violates international law and undermines the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. Then you're going to face consequences that will hurt your country. And there was a lot of skepticism about our ability to coordinate with Europeans for a strong series of sanctions. And each time we have done what we said we would do, including this week. When we put in place sanctions that have an impact on key sectors of the Russian economy, their energy, their defense, their financial systems. It hasn't resolved the problem yet. I spoke to Mr. Putin this morning, and I indicated to him. Just as we will do what we say we do in terms of sanctions, we'll also do what we say we do in terms of wanting to resolve this issue diplomatically if he takes a different position. If he respects and honors the right of Ukrainians to determine their own destiny. Then it's possible to make sure that Russian interests are addressed that are legitimate. And that Ukrainians are able to make their own decisions, and we can resolve this conflict and end some of the bloodshed. But the point is, though, Bill, that if you look at the 20th century and the early part of this century, there are a lot of conflicts that America doesn't resolve. That's always been true. That doesn't mean we stop trying. And it's not a measure of American influence. On any given day or at any given moment that there are conflicts around the world that are difficult. The conflict in Northern Ireland raged for a very, very long time until finally something broke. Where the parties decided that it wasn't worth killing each other. The Palestinian-Israeli conflict has been going on even longer than you've been reporting. And I don't think at any point was there a suggestion somehow that America didn't have influence just because we weren't able to finalize an Israeli-Palestinian peace deal. You will recall that situations like Kosovo and Bosnia raged on for quite some time. and there was a lot more death and bloodshed than there has been so far in the Ukrainian situation before it ultimately did get resolved. And so I recognize with so many different issues popping up around the world. Sometimes it may seem as if this is an aberration or it's unusual. But the truth of the matter is that there's a big world out there, and that as indispensable as we are to try to lead it. There's still going to be tragedies out there, and there are going to be conflicts. And our job is to just make sure that we continue to project what's right, what's just. And that we're building coalitions of like-minded countries and partners in order to advance not only our core security interests but also the interests of the world as a whole. Question: do you think you could have done more? President Obama, on which one? Question: on any of them? Ukraine. President Obama: well look, I think, Bill. That the nature of being president is that you're always asking yourself what more can you do? But with respect to, let's say, the Israeli-Palestinian issue, this administration invested an enormous amount to try to bring the parties together around a framework for peace and a two-state solution. John Kerry invested an enormous amount of time. In the end, it's up to the two parties to make a decision. We can lead them to resolve some of the technical issues and to show them a path, but they've got to want it.